Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Ancient indigenous peoples lived on the planet for centuries, while modern humans have managed to trash it in less than 200 years. Can we use the wisdom of the ancients to create modern ecological civilization? Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to delve into the ancient wisdom as it applies to developing a modern ecological civilization is John Perkins. John first apprenticed with shamans he lived with in the Amazon rainforest from 1968 to 1971 and has since studied with shamans in many cultures. As chief economist at an international consulting firm, he advised governments, the United Nations, World Bank, and other organizations. His 11 books on shamanism and economics have been on the New York Times bestseller list for more than 70 weeks, sold millions of copies, and are published in 38 languages. John has been featured on major TV, film, and print media. He was awarded the Lennon Ono Peace Prize. His website, johnperkins.org. John, thank you for joining us on Mission Evolution.
It's great to be with you, Wilda.
This should be an interesting thing, shamanism on one hand and economics on the ecology on the other. It's like, okay, this could be fun. So you were living with indigenous peoples in Amazon. Why?
Well, back in the late 60s, when I graduated from business school, there was something called the Vietnam War going on. And I didn't like it. And I did not want to go to Vietnam and kill people I had nothing against or be killed by them. And an alternative was the Peace Corps, a possible alternative. So I joined the Peace Corps. And the Peace Corps sent me deep into the Amazon rainforest in Ecuador to hang out with indigenous people there. Actually, they sent me there to teach these indigenous people how to form credit and savings co-ops. It's kind of a funny story because I spent 8 weeks in the United States learning Spanish and about credit and savings co-ops. Peace Corps then sends me to a place where they don't speak Spanish. They speak Schwa, the indigenous language. And they can't form credit and savings co-ops because they have no currency. It's all bananas for papayas. It's a barter economy. So, my experience with U.S. government work was they teach you a language, send you to a place where nobody speaks it, teach you a skill, and send you to a place where nobody can use it.
That sounds about right. Still operates the same way as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get started here. Would you define shamanism for us?
I think the simplest and shortest definition of a shaman is a woman or a man who journeys to other worlds, shamanic journeys, what we might call it hypnotism, or however it's done. Sometimes it's done with plants like ayahuasca. Often it's done with drums or whatever. But while in those other worlds, the shaman receives information, energy, power, and has to use what he receives or she receives to affect change in this world. So a lot of people think of shamans as healers, personal healers, and they do. A lot of them do that. Most of them do that. Not all of them, most of them. But they also do a lot more than that. They'll help communities understand what to do when the river's rising or if the crops are failing or the hunting season is not going well. So they perform a lot of tasks. And I think, we could say a lot of people journey to other worlds. Yogis, meditators, priests, prayers, journey to another world. But the difference is the shaman has to use what he or she learns in those other worlds to affect change in this world. And usually not to the shaman's personal advantage, but to help a community or another individual.
So how do they do that? How do they use this information to make a change in the physical world when it's esoteric information?
Well, that's where it's different in every culture. So what's the language of the culture? So in the deep Amazon, it's about plants. And a lot of people these days have heard of ayahuasca, this plant that a lot of the shamans use, but they use a lot of different plants for different things. So the plant culture and making what you call icaros, which are a type of song that help people to journey to other worlds. In the high Andes, not too far away from the Amazon, where I also trained with shamans, they use the stones from the volcanoes. They use fire from the volcanoes. They use eggs. They use different processes. And in Tibet, they do it differently. All over the world, you'll find that it's whatever the language is. Wilda, we could say that modern therapists, in a way, some of them are forms of shamans. That maybe if they're going into intuition and turning to other worlds, and they use the spoken word because that's what we understand in our culture. So, when I say that shamans, I used a general definition of shamans, but every culture has a different teaching approach. Sometimes it takes many years to learn what, basically the language, the process that will really help people understand and make the transition that's necessary.
So now, are these processes basically ceremonies that are particular to the culture, but that help them access, say, the quantum level?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. These days, I continue to take people into the Amazon. I take small groups. When they go into the Amazon, they often use these plants and they use the Icaros, the songs, and our people are invited to take shamanic journeys and also just to spend time in the forest, feeling the spirit of the forest and the plants and learning to live as a part of nature rather than the way we kind of live as a part from nature. I also take groups of people to the Mayan people of Guatemala into the deep jungles there around Tikal. And the Mayans use fire ceremonies, a very, very different approach, but it can take you to the same altered state, if you want to call it that, as a different state of consciousness where you can receive this information, energy, wisdom to use to affect change in this world.
Now, I understand originally that the before a budding shaman, an apprentice would enter into the ayahuasca initiatory ceremony. There was an awful lot of personal work that had to go on ahead of time to prepare them. Is that still the case? And if it is, what's that do for our people that go there for a couple weeks?
Well, when people go on a journey with me, for example, it's not about ayahuasca. It's about integrating with the jungle, understanding the connection with the jungle. They do have an opportunity to take ayahuasca with a shaman, and there's not much preparation that's required when you're taking it. It's suggested that you fast the day that you take it at night. So for the person just taking the ayahuasca, there's not a lot of preparation. The shaman, to become a shaman, to go through the initiation to become a shaman, is very rigorous. For one thing, uh, when you start, and I've been through this, the shaman blows into your left wrist invisible darts. That they're like the blowgun darts that the hunters use, but they're invisible. And these darts travel up into your heart. And for a year, they mature in the heart and they reproduce in the heart. And you have to go on a very strict diet and you can't do certain things. You're not supposed to have sex. You're not supposed to eat certain foods that would interfere with the growth of these. And then when you're practicing shamanism, when the patient is before you, it may be on ayahuasca, it may not be, the shaman blows these darts into the patient and is able to look in like x-rays and see where there's a problem and then sucks it out and regurgitates it into the earth and sends the problems back. And I got to tell you, we've taken a lot. I probably have taken about 2,000 people over the last, well, since the early 80s into these kind of practices. And I've seen some amazing results, which, it defies our scientific knowledge, but it can work.
Well, the scientific knowledge is kind of leaving us in the dust to a certain extent. I mean, we've gotten so scientific. Look at what's happened to our medical professions, you know.
Exactly.
The human factor is missing.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned the How many different cultures have shamanic practice? A lot of people think, and we're about out of time in this segment, but a lot of people think that, oh, it's the Native Americans. But you've been talking about different practices. How many are there?
Everywhere. I think every culture that maintains traditions that goes back hundreds or thousands of years has this all over Asia, Africa, the Middle East, Europe, the Celtic peoples, and many other groups in Europe, North America, South America, Central America. Everywhere, there have been shamanic practices. Many of them have been made, they have to have gone clandestine because there are laws or taboos that make it very difficult to be a shaman. And that's changed in the last 20 years or so, where people have opened up a lot more to accepting shamanism. But for many years, for example, in the Soviet countries, which many of those countries have a very strong tradition in shamanism, you couldn't practice it under the fear of
Oh,
execution.
they were absolutely traumatized and
Yeah.
victimized, and just for doing a practice that helps their community. It's heartbreaking.
And in the United States, we shut it down with the North American indigenous people, the
Exactly.
ghost dance, and those were all part of the shamanic tradition.
Exactly. Well, it's time for that station break, but John and I will return very shortly. So don't you go away. We're going to come from the other side to visit you again. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Is shamanism just a superstition? With us this hour, discussing the many faces of shamanism, is author of Touching the Jaguar, John Perkins. John, we were having fun talking about how many different forms of shamanism there are, and it sounds to me like nobody owns the wind. It's everywhere. Nobody has a corner on it. But the persecution of the shamanic people, what do you think has been the result of that? Has the form been deteriorated because of it?
Well, Wilda, it's hard to generalize. You go around the world and see many different experiences. But I think in general, there've always been people that maintain the traditions in most places. That's certainly been true throughout Latin America and North America to a large degree. It was true in Siberia and in the steppes of Asia and the Soviet rule, where you were threatened with death if you practiced, if you owned a shamanic drum even. So they went underground, and now in recent times around the world, shamanism has reemerged because it goes along with some of the prophecies that say that we've entered a time when the eagle and the condor, the heart and the mind, the people who believe that we are a part of nature will come together with the people who believe we are part from nature, we're supreme over nature, us, and in the process of destroying the world, that these people will come together. And we've certainly seen that happening in the last 20 years or so, where there's been a real acceptance of shamanism in so many of our industrialized cultures. And at the same time, the shamans have been willing to come out and share their knowledge. And it's happened. It happened pretty quickly in Latin America, a little more slowly in North America, but we've seen this evolving.
So, what's your take on? I mean, like you say, it's having a reemergence, but there's a downside to that in that everybody that takes a weekend workshop hangs their shingle out as a shaman in this country at this point. There's a lot of new age approach to it, and take a little bit from this practice, a little bit from that practice, and go off half cocked and name it after yourself.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of that. What's your take on that?
Well, it's kind of mixed. I used to teach an intensive course in shamanism that was very intensive, and people emerged from that, and they really had a good capability of practicing these things, of journeying to other worlds and opening to their imagination, or what we might call being in spirit, inspiration. But I used to be very careful to say, you can't claim to be an indigenous shaman from the Lakota people, or the Shuar of the Amazon, or the Quechua. You haven't been trained in any of those. You've been trained in a very general aspect of being able to access information by doing this journey to other worlds, which may or may not help people. But be very, very careful about how you present yourself. You can't present yourself as being a certified shaman in any particular culture. You can say that you've been trained in some of the shamanic techniques and tools, and you'd like to try to use them on somebody, but I think it's important for people to be very, very careful about how they present this. Not everybody is, and that's sad. They're quacks. There's no question. And I'm very concerned about the increasing popularity of ayahuasca and San Pedro and peyote and some of the other plants, because although I love these plants and I'm quite familiar with them, I've been trained in them, it takes a really important approach to that. And when I see these things proliferating, for example, the other day somebody asked me, he said, how many times did you take ayahuasca this last year? I did it 20 times. And I said, I haven't done it for 10 years. And the plant and I are still getting to know each other. And that's important. There's a relationship. And like, why would you take it 20 times? Why would, it's almost addictive. It's not an addictive thing physically. It's not a very pleasant experience physically, but it is, I think, can be addictive socially. Oh, there's an ayahuasca party this Saturday night at such and such a person's house. Come. That bothers me a lot. And it doesn't just bother me because people are abusing it. It also bothers me because I'm afraid the plant's being terribly abused. And I know it's being grown in places like Hawaii and other places, maybe with insecticides and fertilizers. And I'm concerned about this. I love to see the spread of shamanism, but it's like anything, whether you're a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a medical doctor, whatever, people need to be really well trained.
And for the average person that has said, okay, great, I really feel like there's a piece missing in my healing process or in my awareness, and I'd really like to get the help of a shaman. How are they going to find somebody that they know is well represented versus a weekend warrior?
Well, and there are some very legitimate people doing this, including people giving ayahuasca. And I think the important thing is to get the recommendations from others who've gone to these people, and quite a few recommendations, and make sure that the people that have gone to this particular individual that you're checking out have had very good and positive experiences and been well taken care of. And that's not just true in the United States. I mean, there's a growing class of whacks in Latin America too. That you can fly down to Lima, Peru, and there's a shaman on the street. Or you may find him on the internet or her, but these people aren't necessarily legitimate. So it's really important to do some real due diligence work and see what their experience is, what their training is, and what experiences other people have had.
So, do you consider yourself a shaman? You've trained quite a while.
Yeah, I've been initiated in several different shamanic traditions, quite a few, and over the many, many, many years. But these days I have chosen to apply shamanism to changing the corporate world. So, I think we're at a time when we've created this death economy. Which, I'm an economist too by training, and I was an economic hitman, a chief economist at a consulting firm. And what I see is how we've got to turn around this concept that profits need to be maximized in the short term, regardless of the social and environmental cost. We need to maximize materialistic consumption. Those are driving us to an economic system we call the death economy that's polluting and consuming itself towards self-destruction. And you can apply shamanism because beneath everything else, what shamanism says is that perception molds reality. And we know that's true. There's no United States, there's no Canada, there's no Peru. There's no corporations, there's no religion, there's no culture except and until enough people accept the perception that it's there and codify that perception into law or take actions to back it up. And then that changes reality. And shamanism, every shamanic culture I've ever worked in or been part of will teach you that perception molds reality. It's the basis of psychotherapy. It's the basis of marketing. It's the basis of politics, And so if we want to get out of this death economy, we need to change our perception of what it means to be successful human beings and successful businesses on this planet. And so these days I really apply these shamanic principles to trying to create a new perception of what it means to be human beings, being human on this amazing planet that is our home.
A lot of the old practices, like we've spoken, were designed for the culture at hand. Is there a way that we can bring it forward? Okay, keeping what they all have in common, if you will. So you're sticking to the principles and apply it in a modern way.
Yes, absolutely, and that's what I try to do these days, and working with corporations. I've worked with individuals to a certain degree, but I really want to see how corporations and those of us who have impact on corporations, which is all of us. Every one of us is a consumer, and many of us work for corporations, and some of us are managers, some of us are investors. We all have this impact, and if we can turn this perception of maximizing short-term profits around to you got to make some profit in a business in order to keep going, but you don't have to maximize it. You can put a lot of your profit money toward the long term, toward the future. And actually, when I went to business school before the mid 70s, everything changed in the mid 70s, and I can get into that if you want. But before that, I was taught that a good businessman, a good CEO, makes a decent rate of return for investors, but also takes good care of his employees, pays them well, and gives them pensions for retirement and healthcare insurance, and takes good care of the communities where the business is located. Donate some money to local libraries or recreation centers or educational processes or something, and is a good citizen and is looking at the long-term benefit of the community. That was part of the ethos I was taught at business school in the late 60s. Uh, that all changed in 1976 when Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize in economics. And Milton Friedman had a huge impact on the world, and he changed the perception. He said, no, no, no. The only responsibility of business is to maximize short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental cost. Just maximize profits. But it's just a perception. What we need to do now is turn that perception around. You know, blow the old perception apart, glow in the energy of a new perception very shamanically, and I think we're in the process of doing it. People around the world are waking up to the fact where we're understanding that what we've created is a degenerative system that is not going to serve the long term, and we need to change.
Well, it's time for another commercial break, and we will pick up on this amazing subject on the other side. John and I will be right back to continue our discussion. So you stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Can the ancient practice of shamanism actually heal what ails us today? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing the modern day application of an ancient practice is John Perkins. His website, johnperkins.org. John, we were talking about how the concept of business took a really nasty turn, and now it's pretty mercenary. It's all about the short-term profit and to heck with everybody else. And we're starting to see that result in more places than just the economy. I mean, our entire society has kind of embraced that in a way. How do you see shamanism as being able to turn that around?
Well, I think the idea that the shamanic idea of perception molding reality. We just need to change the perception. So it's not so much of shamanism turning it around, it's the philosophy behind shamanism. And it's also the philosophy behind so much in our world. We've known for a long time, philosophers have known of the rule that perception takes in all of this. And I'll give a quick example of my first experience with shamanism, if I might. Is that okay?
Please, that'd be wonderful.
So this is 1969. I'm in the Peace Corps, deep in the jungle, and I got very, very sick. I was dying. I couldn't keep any food down. I couldn't stand up. I was a 3-day, very, very difficult through dense jungle and then a terrible bus ride up rickety old mountain roads to the nearest medical facility. I couldn't even stand up. And so there's no way. And a shaman offers to heal me, and an indigenous shaman. And that night, he took me on a shamanic journey. And while I was on that journey, I heard of you know the concept touching the jaguar comes from this, because the jaguar, they say, is something that in a vision quest that blocks your path. So the shaman said, see the jaguar. and I look all around like it's the middle of the night in the middle of the jungle, and there are jaguars out there. And I'm like, where's the jaguar? He says, no, close your eyes, visualize the jaguar. So I do, and I see this jaguar, and at that moment I hear a voice like my mother saying, son, the food and drink will kill you. And I then saw how what I'm doing is that these people, and people in the Amazon area, do not drink water from the rivers, because they know the rivers have organic matter, and the dead animals, dead trees, you can't drink it. So the women make a kind of chicha by chewing manioc root and spitting it. That sets up a fermentation process that creates a kind of a beer called chicha. And then you can add water to it. You make it be very alcoholic, and then you add water and you can drink it. And the foods, there were some very strange foods. And I'm drinking a lot of chicha to rehydrate, because there wasn't any Perrier. And I'm eating a lot of these very squirming white grubs and all kinds of strange foods, because there weren't any Cliff Bars. And I hear my mother's voice saying, this food and drink will kill you. At the same time, I saw how incredibly robust the Shuar were. Men are all built like Tarzan. The women, I was in my early 20s, but women were looking great. And people lived to be very old if they didn't die in an accident of some sort, hunting accident or snake bite or something. And so I realized at that moment that the food and drink weren't killing me. It was my perception. And a few days later, I'm very healthy again. And the shaman comes up to me and says, you need to be my apprentice. You owe me. You need to be my apprentice. I graduated from business school. All I wanted to do at that point was get out and make money, but I then spent the next couple of years as his apprentice, and it was an incredible experience. And the most important lesson was to realize that perception molds reality. Just like my perception that the food and drink was killing me. And that seems a little remarkable, but we can take that to so many aspects of life. I can't be a writer because my English teacher gave me bad grades. I can't do this because I'm not the right color, I'm not the right gender, I'm not the right height. I don't have enough education. Whatever, these perceptions that come in and distract us from doing what we really want to do. But if we reach out and touch them instead of running from them, like touching the jaguar in the vision quest, don't run from it, it'll chase you. Touch it. And then you can change your perception, which then helps you change your actions, which then changes reality. And that's true on a personal basis, but it's also true on a social basis.
So if we are blocked, the jaguar standing in front of us, that would indicate that there's something that we believe that's blocking us. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, a perception. Yes.
Interesting. So, how do we start to turn these perceptions around? Are you considering using shamanic ceremony in business? Do you even mention to the businesses that you're coaching that this is shamanic in nature?
Usually I don't mention that. No, I don't use the word shaman. I do use the word perception and reality. Perception molds reality. And business people all know that. I mean, that's what advertising is all about. That's what marketing is all about. They're very familiar with these concepts. But I actually have ended up taking some very, very high level C-suite officers from Fortune 100 companies into the Amazon as a result, and to the Mayan people. There's this, a very high level C-suite officer at HP, which used to be Hewlett Packard, a Fortune 100 company, that now it was rated the last 4 years by Newsweek magazine as the #1 most responsible company in the United States. And this executive was deeply, deeply impacted by these teachings of mine and the books that I've written. And so went on some of these trips, and it had a huge impact. And so we're seeing corporations begin to turn things around. But what I really need to reach, and what others need to reach to change the perception, is the investment community, because Wall Street is a large part of the problem. You know, that CEOs and other corporate executives know that if their profits drop very much, they're going to be replaced by someone who only cares about profits. And so working with those communities, and it's becoming easier because a lot of the investment community is tied in with the insurance companies, which are, partners, and the insurance companies realize that the biggest threat that they face today for the long term is climate change and this death economy. So things are beginning to change there too. It takes work, but it's good work.
Well, one of the things I love most about shamanism is that it's so earth-based, and every shamanic culture at its root is earth-based or stellar-based or both usually. But also it deals in balance, doesn't it? Is keeping the individuals and the communities in balance with nature. How does that apply to business?
Well, the recognition that we are a part of, not apart from nature. This idea that we are supreme, that we're made in God's image, and therefore we have the right to do whatever it takes to maximize short-term profits, rip up the earth. And that's very out of balance these days. And business schools are beginning to see that. And I've done a lot of work with some of the business schools and trying to help to bring this around. And I think, anybody who's got any brains at all understands this now. The challenge is putting it into action without losing your job. and again,
There's that.
yeah, and again, it's reaching the investment community, but also the consumers community. So all of us have a role to play to let corporations know, I'm not buying your products anymore because you're abusing nature. You're not trying to be more sustainable. Let's face it, nobody's perfect. There's probably no perfect corporation out there, but there are a lot that are doing better than others. And so the idea is support those that are doing well and let them know why you're supporting them. Send them an email, send them a text, or however you communicate, and let the ones that you're not buying from know why you're not buying from them. I'm not buying from you because you're not doing as well as your competitor in helping turn this environmental issue around, climate change around. Communicate. I think this is very important. Every one of us has a role to play. It's not just about shopping properly. It's also about sending the message to the corporations so that they will turn around. And we are seeing this happen with solar energy and wind and so on.
So it's a two-pronged deal here, it sounds like, that not only do the companies have to, at least some of them, start to step up and live life in a good way, basically, so that there's balance, give and take in what they're doing. But then the consumer, the average person, has to participate and support them with their words and where they buy money. How can we encourage the ones? I mean, that takes a lot of courage and encourage. It takes a lot of courage for a company to really change the whole premise of how it operates. Is there a way to outline how that can happen without destroying the company?
Well, yeah, and it depends on the company and what business it's in and how it's working, and to recognize that a lot of these companies are actually in the position to build bridges between countries. Unlike governments, the U.S. and China see themselves as competing, but corporations that work in both countries see it as a bridge. And how do we benefit from both? And I think part of what you're asking is what can each of us as individuals do? And I write in my most recent books about 5 questions we can each ask ourselves that'll take us down that path. And I'd love to share that with you and your audience, but I don't know whether we have time in this segment or whether we should wait for the next.
Actually, we don't, but we can certainly open the next segment with it because that's a hugely important piece of the equation, isn't it?
It
It's
is.
going to take a tribe here. I don't think a company can do it, and I don't think the people can do it, but we have to pull us everybody together.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
please stay with us as John and I continue to explore shamanism in the modern world. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. What is an ecological civilization? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with John Perkins, his website, johnperkins.org. John, what is an ecological civilization?
Well, I think it's a civilization we could say that is sustainable. It lives. It lives. It knows it's a part of, not apart from nature. We might even use the word thrivable, where it can thrive by creating a life economy that pays people to clean up pollution and regenerate destroyed environments, plant trees and mine plastic that's floating around in the ocean and recycle it, and so on and so forth, and doesn't create waste. So it has a cyclical economy where you can recycle everything and reuse it. You don't have to keep ravaging the earth.
Like working like the Earth does, right?
Exactly. And throughout most of the 200,000 or so years that we've been human beings, we've lived pretty much in ecological civilizations as indigenous people in places like the Amazon still do, although that's changing too. It's only been within the blink of an eye historically that this has changed. And we may say it goes back a couple of thousand years, back to the time of the ancient Greeks and the Romans and so on. But, it's really gotten worse during my lifetime, and especially in the last couple of decades. We see ourselves moving more and more to this death economy, which is the opposite of ecological civilization. But we humans know how to do it. We've been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years.
However, there used to be a lot fewer of us on the planet. With the masses that we have now, I mean, it's not like we can, pick up our TP and go to a new campsite when we've when we've worn out the one and it needs to recuperate itself. How can we apply that in such a way that fits in with our massive population?
Well, yes, I think the Earth has limits as to how many people we can have on this planet. I don't think we've come close to reaching that limit, frankly. We've got a distribution problem. When you consider that, there's a handful of people that have as much wealth as half the world's population. Well, in the United States alone, there's 3 individuals that have as much wealth as half the US population. And so, it's a distribution issue. If those people were willing to devote their wealth to helping create better food and better housing and better lifestyles for the lower half of the economically speaking population, things would change, and we could look at that all over the whole world. So I agree. I mean, yes, there are limits to population, but right now I would say the biggest issue that we have to face is the distribution of income and the distribution of resources and the terrible, terrible ravaging of resources in ways that are almost irreparable. They're not irreparable. We can repair the damage that we've done for the most part, but we need to set our hearts and minds to making that happen.
And speaking of which, before we went into the last break, you promised us 5 guidelines for the individual to participate and to help with this.
Yeah, I
What are
think.
they?
Well, thanks. I think, we all know about shopping correctly and so on and so forth and sending communications but beyond that, each one of us can ask ourselves 5 important questions. And the first is, what is it that I most want to do for the rest of my life? What will bring me the greatest satisfaction, the greatest bliss? Because we can't be successful if we don't do what we really want to do. We may make money, but we won't really be successful. And I would answer that question by saying, I want to write. I love to write. Wilda, I really enjoy writing. But I have a friend who's a carpenter who doesn't like to write at all, but he loves to work with his hands and wood. So that's what he wants to do for the rest of his life. Second question is, how do I do that in a way that helps transform the death economy to a life economy? And I would say, well, I'm going to write about these things. I want to write books and other things that inspire people to be part of this movement. And my carpenter friend would say, I'm only going to use sustainable materials. And I know how many trees get cut every time I build a house or use wood. I'm going to replant those trees. I'm going to replant 2 trees for anyone that gets cut. So I'm going to play my part. And the third question is, well, what's stopping you from doing this? What's the jaguar that's on your path that's holding you back? For me, I might say, well, I know that to be a successful writer, I've got to write every day for at least an hour or 2, and I just don't have time. And my carpenter friend might say, well, my clients aren't willing to pay the extra price for sustainable materials that get me to replant trees. They'll pay for that. And so that brings up the fourth question is, when you touch that jaguar, when you confront that blockage, how do your perceptions change in a way that will change your actions and change reality? And I would say as a writer, well, I can turn off the television for a couple of hours every night earlier, or get up a little earlier every morning and write. Ah, and my carpenter friend will say, well, I'm going to tell my clients that when they pay a little extra for the sustainable materials, it's not a cost. It's an investment in the future for them and their families, and their children and grandchildren. And the fifth question then is, okay, so what actions do I take immediately? For me, got to write, got to turn off the television and write. The carpenter has to start building cabinets like this one behind me with sustainable materials and tell everybody, look, and tell the kids, like, look, your parents are building a house or building a cabinet with sustainable materials because they're investing in your future. And I think, every one of us can ask that question. So if you're a teacher or a parent or a student or whatever you are, plumber, whatever you are, you can take that same approach. And if we can all take that approach and always being organized around, but how do I do this in a way that creates an ecological civilization that transforms the death economy to a life economy, which then takes us to an ecological civilization? How, if we can all do that, we'll get there. And I think it's important to ask these questions fairly frequently, because although the first 2 may not change, the latter 3 will. Once I've committed to writing for 2 hours every day, then the next question is, well, what am I going to write? Then the next question is, what's the first sentence? What's the second sentence? And so on and so forth. So it's important that we really look at this seriously. I think I encourage people I teach to ask themselves these questions fairly frequently. It only takes 5 minutes, maybe less than 5 minutes every morning when you wake up.
So it's that time in the show, John, when I get to ask you, what's your mission?
Well, it's to create an ecological civilization, to transform the death economy to a life economy. Yeah, that's my mission.
That's an important one, an absolutely important one. You mentioned several times if we all, but will it take all of us, or is there something about the 100th monkey working here?
Yeah, yeah, I think a critical mass, and I think we're getting there. I mean, people are changing. I have the distinct. I'm blessed with the opportunity to travel around the world. I've spoken in Russia fairly recently, and in China, and the Czech Republic, and all over Latin America, and many places. And everywhere I go, I see that people are turning around. They're understanding. We understand the next step is then to take the actions that will change reality. But the first step is perception, to confront this perception that we have to change, and how do we change? So it just takes a critical mass, and we've got to keep working on it. But I think we're moving in that direction.
I hope so. I hope so. I have children. I have grandchildren.
Yeah,
I want them to have a world, or a better world, actually, than what you and I inherited.
mhm.
Yeah,
Yes, our children and grandchildren are great motivators, aren't they?
they absolutely are. And other people's children and grandchildren, whether you have them yourself or not. I mean, you look at these innocent ones and you think, what are we going to leave them if we don't take action now?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, if a person really does want to make a difference as an individual, would you suggest these 5 questions to be their very first step?
Yeah, I think that's a very good one. And they may have already taken some earlier steps of shopping differently or whatever, cutting back on the use of fossil fuels or whatever. So, but I think that this goes along with some of the other approaches that we all know that we we need to do more of.
Well, there's two things that you've kind of pointed out. One you've stated very clearly, and the other has been kind of in the background. The one you stated very clearly, of course, is perception. And we have to find our jaguar block to approach our misconceptions. But what about intention? How does our intention affect what's going on?
Well, yeah. So that's that second question. The first two questions I ask, what do I most want to do for the rest of my life? That's an intention. I set an intention of what I want to do. I want to write. I want to be a carpenter, whatever. And then that second question ties in with this, is in the process of doing that, my intent in doing that is also to help transform the death economy to a life economy, to create an ecological civilization that future generations will thank us for. So those two intents are very, very important, and they drive perception, and then perception drives actions, and that then drives reality.
Well, we're about out of time altogether, but where does gratitude fit in here, John?
Phew, I'm so grateful to be alive right now. And I think that all of us should be grateful that we live at this moment where human evolution is progressing, we're changing, we are understanding, we're at this cusp in history that's been projected, been forecasted by prophecies all over the world, that we've entered a portal where we have the opportunity to redefine what it means to be humans, being human on this planet, and we're evolving, and we're all part of this. So I think I feel the gratitude of being part of all this. I feel gratitude for being on your show and for the fact that we're talking about this and this is happening. I think we should all be grateful that we're alive at this time in history.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, we've hit that point that we are out of time. Thanks so much for joining us. Our guest this hour has been John Perkins, the author of 11 books, including Touching the Jaguar. You can find out more about John, or you can find his books and everything he offers at his website, johnperkins.org. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archives episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But be sure to join us right here next time. This mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to our evolving world.